Sometimes love doesn't start with fireworks, romantic music, and a movie-perfect stare. Sometimes it starts with a check-in form, a receptionist with zero patience, and two people thinking, I want to disappear. But here's the thing. When two embarrassments collide in the same place, it turns into a competition. And when fate decides to play Cupid, it doesn't send flowers. It sends ridiculously perfect coincidence. The emergency room at St. Margaret's Hospital was a symphony of chaos on that bitter winter afternoon. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their unforgiving glow on rows of plastic chairs filled with sniffling children, worried mothers, and the occasional construction worker nursing bruised limbs. Colin Rutherford walked through the automatic doors with his hand wrapped in what could only be described as a catastrophic attempt at first aid. The white handkerchief, now spotted with crimson, had been tied hastily around his palm, and despite his best efforts to maintain the dignified posture of a man who ran a multi-million-pound investment firm, he felt utterly ridiculous. Nature of injury? The receptionist asked without looking up. Colin cleared his throat. I was bitten by a cat. The woman's eyes finally met his, a flicker of amusement dancing in them. A cat? It appeared docile, he said through clenched teeth. I was visiting a client's home for a business meeting. The animal attacked without provocation. His sister Eleanor, who had insisted on driving him despite his protests, snorted behind him. The cat was sleeping on a contract he needed to sign. Colin tried to move it. I see. The receptionist handed him a clipboard. Take a seat. We'll call you shortly. Colin found a chair in the corner, as far from prying eyes as possible, and sat with his jaw tight enough to crack walnuts. Eleanor settled beside him, immediately picking up a dog-eared magazine and flipping through it with infuriating cheerfulness. Stop enjoying this, he muttered. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm reading about celebrity diets. He closed his eyes, willing the throbbing in his hand to subside. At 36 years old, he had built a reputation for being unshakable, calculating, and perpetually in control, being felled by a 15-pound tabby named Mr. Whiskers was not part of his carefully constructed image. The automatic doors whooshed open again, and Colin's eyes flickered toward the sound purely out of reflex. What he saw made his breath catch in an unexpected way. She was perhaps 28, with honey-brown hair that fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and eyes the color of autumn leaves. She approached the reception desk, holding her right index finger, her cheeks flushed with what appeared to be acute embarrassment. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. I caught my finger in my car door, she explained quietly, as if hoping no one else would hear. I was reaching for my bag and the wind. Colin watched her fumble through the explanation, something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. She was wearing a cream-colored sweater that looked impossibly soft, and when she turned to find a seat, their eyes met. His gaze was serious, penetrating, almost severe. Hers went wide, startled and shy, like a deer caught in headlights. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then they both looked away simultaneously, the same thought echoing in their minds. What a ridiculous injury. Addison Hawthorne found a seat 3 rows from the intimidating man in the expensive suit. She could feel heat climbing up her neck, and it had nothing to do with her throbbing finger. The way he had looked at her, intense, unwavering, had made her heart stumble over itself. Stop it, she told herself firmly. You're here because you slammed your own finger in a door like an absolute fool. Focus on that humiliation. But her eyes kept drifting back to him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way he ran his hand through his dark hair in obvious frustration, the careful way he held his bandaged hand. He looked like the kind of man who never made mistakes. And yet, here he was, clearly nursing something embarrassing of his own. Eleanor Rutherford had not survived 32 years as Colin's younger sister without developing razor-sharp instincts for opportunity. She noticed the exact moment her brother's attention snagged on the pretty woman with the injured finger. She noticed how he kept not looking at her, which was far more telling than if he had simply stared. With the casual grace of someone who had spent years orchestrating social situations, Eleanor set down her magazine and walked directly over to the young woman. Finger caught in a door, she asked brightly, sliding into the adjacent seat. Addison blinked, startled by the sudden appearance of this energetic stranger, with warm eyes and a conspiratorial smile. Yes, embarrassingly so. Don't feel bad. My brother over there was bitten by a cat. Eleanor gestured toward Colin, who was now glaring at her with undisguised horror. You're tied on the scale of ridiculous injuries. A laugh escaped Addison before she could stop it, light, musical, and completely genuine. A cat. Apparently it looked docile. Eleanor grinned. I'm Eleanor, by the way. Addison. From his corner seat, Colin watched his sister work her social magic, torn between irritation and something he couldn't quite name. Eleanor had no boundaries, no sense of appropriate distance, no understanding that some people preferred to suffer their humiliations in private. And yet, when Addison laughed, the entire waiting room seemed less oppressive. The harsh lights softened. The antiseptic smell faded. There was something about her, something luminous and warm that made the grey afternoon feel almost bearable. His stomach did something strange, something fluttery and unfamiliar. Butterflies. His mind supplied unhelpfully. Colin frowned deeply, thoroughly unsettled by the sensation. By the time Eleanor returned to her seat 45 minutes later, she and Addison had exchanged phone numbers, discovered a shared love of old bookshops and strong tea, and made plans for coffee. Tomorrow at that cafe on Pemberton Street? Eleanor suggested, standing to leave as the nurse finally called Colin's name. I'd love that, Addison said, and her gaze drifted, just for a second, toward Colin as he rose. He pretended not to notice, but he noticed everything. The cafe on Pemberton Street was the kind of place that felt like a secret. Tucked between an antique bookshop and a florist whose window displays changed with the seasons, it had exposed brick walls draped with trailing pothos, mismatched wooden tables, and windows that let in rivers of winter sunlight. Eleanor arrived 15 minutes early, ordered 2 cappuccinos, and secured a table near the back where the afternoon light painted golden patterns on the worn oak surface. She had spent the entire previous evening thinking about the woman from the hospital, not just because she seemed lovely, but because of the way Colin had looked at her. Her brother, who had not shown genuine interest in a woman in years. Her brother, who had built walls so high that most people assumed he simply didn't have a heart. He had watched Addison Hawthorne like a man seeing colour for the first time. The door chimed, and Addison walked in, bringing with her that same radiant energy Eleanor had noticed in the emergency room. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, her hair tucked beneath a soft grey beret, and when she spotted Eleanor, her smile was immediate and genuine. I hope I'm not late, Addison said, unwinding her scarf as she sat down. Right on time. I took the liberty of ordering. Eleanor pushed a cappuccino across the table. You seemed like a cappuccino person. Was I wrong? You were absolutely right. Addison wrapped her hands around the warm cup, and Eleanor noticed the small bandage on her finger. How's your brother's hand? 3 stitches and a tetanus shot. His pride may never recover. Addison laughed, that same musical sound that had caught Colin's attention. I only needed the finger splinted. I think I won the ridiculous injury competition. I'll be sure to tell him. He's very competitive. They fell into conversation with the ease of old friends rather than new acquaintances. Eleanor learned that Addison worked at a bank downtown, handling investment portfolios with a precision that belied her gentle demeanor. Addison learned that Eleanor ran an interior design firm, which explained her strong opinions about the cafe's questionable choice of wall sconces. They're trying for vintage charm, Eleanor declared, waving her spoon at the offending fixtures, but they've landed squarely and found in grandmother's attic. I think they're sweet, Addison protested, grinning. You would. You're an optimist. I can tell. The afternoon slipped by in a warm haze of laughter and confessions. They discovered shared opinions on countless random topics, the superiority of physical books over e-readers, the correct way to make tea, the inexplicable appeal of home renovation shows. They created inside jokes within half an hour, the kind that would make no sense to anyone else. So, Eleanor said, stirring her second cappuccino, what's happening in your life outside of finger-related disasters? Addison's eyes lit up. Actually, I just received the most wonderful news. My father bought me an apartment. A gift, he called it, though I suspect he just wants me out of my cramped studio. I'm in the middle of moving. An apartment? That's exciting. Where? Kensington Heights. It's this beautiful old building with high ceilings and original woodwork. I can't quite believe it's mine. Addison paused, something wistful crossing her features. It's overwhelming, honestly. Exciting, but overwhelming. New space, new chapter. Everything's changing. Eleanor's mind raced with a sudden, brilliant idea, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. Moving is exhausting. Are you doing it alone? Mostly. I have some help from the moving company for the big furniture, but the unpacking and organizing, Addison sighed. That's all me. Absolutely not. Eleanor set down her cup with decisive finality. I'm helping. I love organizing. It's basically what I do for a living, and moving alone is depressing. You need company, music, someone to argue with about where to put the sofa. Addison's eyes widened. Eleanor, I couldn't ask you to... You didn't ask. I volunteered. There's a difference. Eleanor was already pulling out her phone. What day works? Saturday. I'll bring coffee and opinions. Something warm bloomed in Addison's chest. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. It had been a long time since someone had offered help so freely, without expectation or ulterior motive. Her last relationship had taught her to be wary of kindness, to look for the strings attached. But Eleanor's smile held nothing but genuine enthusiasm, and Addison found herself nodding. Saturday would be perfect. They parted outside the cafe, with a hug that felt natural despite knowing each other for only a day. Eleanor walked toward her car, already composing a text to her brother. Made a new friend today. You remember the woman from the hospital, the one you definitely weren't staring at? We're having coffee next week too. Also, I'm helping her move on Saturday. She lives at Kensington Heights, small world, isn't it? Colin's response came within seconds. I wasn't staring. Eleanor grinned. Of course you weren't. She didn't mention that Kensington Heights was his building. That particular detail could wait. Across town, Addison walked home through streets gilded with late afternoon light, feeling lighter than she had in months. The move had been weighing on her, the logistics, the solitude of starting over in a new space. But now she had Eleanor, this unexpected burst of sunshine, and the prospect didn't seem quite so daunting. Her phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Forgot to mention, I make terrible playlists but excellent sandwiches. Saturday's lunch is on me. Addison smiled, typing back. I'll provide the tea. Fair trade? More than fair. See you Saturday, new friend. As she climbed the steps to her temporary studio, Addison's thoughts drifted, unbidden, to the man in the waiting room. Colin, Eleanor's brother. The way his serious eyes had found hers across that sterile space, intense and searching, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. She shook her head, pushing the thought away. It was just a moment. It meant nothing. But that night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she couldn't quite forget the flutter in her chest when their eyes had met. And miles away, in a sleek penthouse apartment, Colin Rutherford was having similar trouble falling asleep, though he would never admit it, not even to himself. Saturday arrived wrapped in pale winter sunshine, the kind of light that made London look almost soft. Eleanor appeared at Addison's new apartment at precisely 10 in the morning, armed with a cardboard tray of coffees, a bag of pastries, and enough energy to power a small city. This place has incredible bones, Eleanor announced, spinning in the middle of the empty living room. Look at these ceilings, and the original crown molding. You don't find craftsmanship like this anymore. Addison stood amid a sea of cardboard boxes, feeling slightly overwhelmed but impossibly grateful. I still can't believe it's mine. Believe it. Now where do we start? They started with the kitchen, because Eleanor insisted that a functional kitchen was essential for morale. They unpacked dishes and arranged spices, debated the optimal placement of the coffee maker, and discovered that Addison owned an alarming number of mismatched mugs. Each one has a story, Addison defended, holding up a chipped ceramic cup with a faded painting of a cat. This was from a market in Portugal. That one my mother gave me when I started university. I'm not judging. I'm admiring your commitment to chaos. The morning melted into afternoon, punctuated by laughter and the occasional argument about furniture placement. Eleanor made them move the sofa 3 times before declaring it perfect. Addison hung pictures, while Eleanor offered commentary that ranged from supportive to hilariously critical. That one's crooked. It's artistic. It's crooked and you know it. By the time the winter sun began its early descent toward the horizon, the apartment had transformed. Soft rugs covered the hardwood floors, books lined the shelves, and warm lamplight spilled from carefully positioned fixtures. It looked like a home. Addison collapsed onto the sofa, in its third and final position, and stretched her arms above her head. I couldn't have done this without you. Eleanor dropped beside her, equally exhausted but glowing with satisfaction. You absolutely could have. It just would have taken longer and been significantly less fun. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn pink and gold through the tall windows. Addison felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in a long time. This apartment, this friendship, this new chapter of her life, it all felt right. "You know what we need?" Eleanor said suddenly, sitting up with renewed energy. "Coffee, proper coffee, not the cold dregs we've been drinking all day. I think I unpacked the coffee maker." No, I have a better idea." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with something Addison couldn't quite read. "My brother lives in this building. The penthouse, actually. He has this incredible Italian coffee machine that makes the most divine espresso. Let's go up." Addison's entire body went still. "Your brother lives here? Right upstairs? Isn't that a wonderful coincidence?" Eleanor was already pulling out her phone. "He won't mind. Colin pretends to be antisocial, but he's actually quite hospitable when cornered." Colin. The name echoed in Addison's mind, bringing with it the vivid memory of serious eyes and a sharp jaw, of that moment in the hospital when the world had seemed to narrow to just the two of them. "I don't know if that's a good idea," she managed, her voice slightly higher than normal. "We're a mess and it's getting late and—" But Eleanor was already dialing. "I'm coming up with my friend for coffee," she announced into the phone without preamble. "Get that fancy machine of yours ready." A pause, then, faint but audible, Colin's voice. "Now." "Now!" Addison's stomach performed an elaborate acrobatic routine. This couldn't be happening. The intimidating, impossibly handsome man from the emergency room lived directly above her. They shared a building, a roof, probably the same elevator. Eleanor ended the call with a triumphant smile. "He's preparing it as we speak. Come on." "Eleanor, I really think—" "Nonsense, you'll love the view from up there." Eleanor grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the door. "And Colin needs more social interaction. You'll be doing him a favor." Addison climbed the stairs to the penthouse with the enthusiasm of someone ascending to their own execution. Each step felt heavier than the last. She was acutely aware of her appearance, hair escaping from a messy ponytail, dust on her jeans, not a trace of makeup. She had been moving boxes all day. She looked like she had been moving boxes all day. "Why do you care what you look like?" she demanded of herself. "He's just Eleanor's brother, just a neighbor." "It means nothing." But her thundering heart disagreed. They reached the penthouse door, and Eleanor knocked twice before simply walking in. "We're here!" The apartment stole Addison's breath before she could even register its occupant. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of London settling into twilight, the city's lights beginning to twinkle like earthbound stars. The space was elegant without being cold. Minimalist furniture in warm neutrals, carefully chosen art on the walls, everything immaculate but somehow inviting. And then she saw him. Colin stood by the kitchen counter, coffee cups already arranged with precise spacing. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, his dark hair slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. When his eyes found hers, Addison felt the impact like a physical force. For one endless moment, neither of them spoke. Neither of them breathed. "Oh no," Addison thought with sudden terrifying clarity. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." Eleanor breezed past her, already talking about the apartment and how perfectly everything had come together. Her voice seemed to come from very far away. Colin's gaze never left Addison's face. "Welcome," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "Please come in." Addison stepped forward on legs that didn't quite feel like her own, and the door closed behind her with a soft final click. The penthouse smelled of fresh espresso and something subtle, sandalwood perhaps, or cedar. Addison catalogued these details frantically, desperate for something to focus on besides the man watching her with those penetrating eyes. Colin gestured toward the sitting area near the windows. "Please make yourself comfortable." She sat on the edge of a dove-grey sofa, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The leather was impossibly soft, the cushions perfectly arranged, everything in this space reflecting the controlled precision of its owner. She felt wildly out of place with her dusty jeans and borrowed energy. Eleanor, blissfully oblivious to the tension crackling through the room, threw herself into an armchair with characteristic abandon. "Colin, you should see what we did with her apartment. The transformation is remarkable. She has excellent taste, much better than yours, honestly." "My taste is fine," Colin said flatly, carrying a tray with 3 espresso cups. His movements were economical, graceful in a way that seemed unconscious. When he handed Addison her cup, their fingers brushed for the briefest moment. She nearly dropped it. "Careful," he murmured, steadying the cup with his other hand. His palm was warm against her fingers. "It's hot." Thank you. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Colin settled into the chair opposite her, crossing one long leg over the other. He drank his espresso slowly, and Addison could feel his gaze on her, even when she refused to meet it. She was acutely aware of how she must look, dishevelled, flushed, clutching her coffee cup with both hands to hide the tremor. "So, you're my new neighbour," he commented finally, his tone carefully neutral. Addison forced herself to look up. Apparently. "Neighbour from downstairs," Eleanor added with a smile that could only be described as mischievous. "How convenient." The word hung in the air between them. Convenient. As if fate had arranged this specifically to torment them both. Addison took a sip of her espresso and nearly moaned. It was extraordinary, rich, smooth, with notes of chocolate and something floral she couldn't identify. "This is incredible." A flicker of something crossed Colin's features. Pleasure, pride. It vanished before she could name it. "The beans are from a small roaster in Naples. They ship monthly." "Of course they do," Eleanor said, rolling her eyes affectionately. "My brother doesn't do anything by halves. You should see his wine collection. It has its own temperature-controlled room." "Eleanor," Colin's voice carried a warning edge. "What? I'm just making conversation." Addison should know what kind of neighbour she has. Very particular about his coffee, his wine, his suits. That's enough. Addison found herself studying him despite her better judgment. The way he sat, spine straight, shoulders squared, every inch the powerful businessman, contrasted sharply with the slight tension around his eyes. He wasn't as composed as he appeared. Something about this situation had unsettled him too. The realization was oddly comforting. "The view is beautiful," she offered, desperate to fill the weighted silence. "You can see the whole city." Colin followed her gaze to the windows, where London sparkled beneath the darkening sky. "It's why I chose this apartment. I work long hours. Coming home to this makes it bearable." There was something unexpectedly vulnerable in that admission. Addison filed it away, another piece of the puzzle that was Colin Rutherford. "How's your hand?" she asked suddenly, remembering the reason they had first met. "From the cat?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Healing. The stitches come out next week." "He's been dramatic about it," Eleanor supplied helpfully. "You'd think he'd been mauled by a lion." "I was not being dramatic. I was appropriately cautious about infection. You sanitized the wound 4 times before we got to the hospital. Cleanliness is—" Colin stopped himself, pressing his lips together. He looked at Addison, and she caught the faintest hint of embarrassment beneath his stern exterior. The cat appeared docile. A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Bright, surprised, genuine. Mine probably looked worse. The door literally just closed. I stood there for a full 10 seconds trying to understand what had happened. Something shifted in Colin's expression. The severity softened, just slightly, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. "We made quite the pair in that waiting room." "The ridiculous injury twins," Eleanor declared. "It's basically how I tell the story now." They finished their coffee as the last light faded from the sky. Eleanor carried the conversation, filling every potential silence with observations about the apartment, plans for future gatherings, gentle teasing of her brother that he endured with practiced patience. But beneath her chatter, something else was happening. Colin watched Addison when she wasn't looking, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, how she bit her lower lip when she was thinking, the warm glow of the lamplight on her skin. Addison stole glances at Colin when he was focused on his sister, the strong line of his profile, his hands, elegant, capable, wrapped around his coffee cup, the way his voice dropped lower when he spoke directly to her. Neither acknowledged what was building between them. Neither could have named it if asked. When Addison finally stood to leave, citing exhaustion and an early morning, Colin rose as well. "I'll walk you down." "That's not necessary. I'm literally 1 floor below." "It's late. It's 8 o'clock. I insist." Eleanor made no effort to hide her smile. "Good night, Addison. Welcome to the building." Colin held the door open, and Addison stepped into the hallway, with her heart beating an unsteady rhythm. They descended the single flight of stairs in silence, stopping at her door. "Thank you for the coffee," she said softly, fumbling with her keys. "You're welcome." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "If you need anything, moving boxes, a ladder, anything, I'm right upstairs." The offer surprised her. "That's very kind. It's practical. We're neighbours." Neighbours. The word felt insufficient somehow. but she nodded, unlocked her door, and slipped inside. "Good night, Colin." "Good night, Addison." She closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding against her ribs. Through the ceiling she heard his footsteps retreating upstairs. They lived in the same building now, shared the same walls, the same elevator, the same entrance. Their lives had become suddenly, unexpectedly intertwined. Addison pressed her palm to her chest and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Addison could only describe as exquisite torture. She saw Colin everywhere. In the lobby, collecting his mail with that serious expression that made her stomach flip. In the elevator, standing so close she could smell his cologne, something warm and sophisticated that lingered in her thoughts long after he was gone. In the hallway, passing with brief nods and formal good mornings that felt nothing like what they actually were. Each encounter lasted mere seconds. Each one left her breathless for hours. "Good morning? Good morning?" The elevator doors would close, and they would stand in suffocating silence, their reflections caught in the polished brass walls. Addison learned to study those reflections, his profile sharp and beautiful, his hands always perfectly still at his sides, the way his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly whenever she stepped closer to press her floor button. He noticed everything about her too, the soft scarves she wore against the winter cold, how she always carried a book in her bag, the corner peeking out like a secret, the way she hummed under her breath when she thought she was alone, melodies he couldn't identify but found himself trying to remember later. Colin had built his life on control, every variable accounted for, every outcome anticipated. But Addison Hawthorne was a variable he hadn't predicted, and she was disrupting everything. One morning they entered the elevator simultaneously, she from her floor, he from the penthouse. The doors closed, trapping them in that small space with its brass walls and soft lighting. 15 floors to the lobby. An eternity. "How are you settling in?" he asked, the question formal and stiff. "Very well, thank you. The apartment is lovely." "Good." Silence. Addison stared at the descending numbers, willing them to move faster. She was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the heat of him, the way the air seemed to thicken whenever they occupied the same space. "The heating works properly?" he continued, as if grasping for any topic. "Yes, perfectly. The building manager can be slow to respond to maintenance requests. If you have any issues, I'll let you know." The doors opened, and they stepped into the lobby like survivors escaping a sinking ship. Colin nodded once, strode toward the entrance, and disappeared into the grey morning. Addison stood frozen for a long moment, hand pressed to her racing heart. "This is ridiculous," she told herself firmly. "He's just a neighbor, an attractive, intense, impossibly magnetic neighbor who makes you forget how to breathe." She needed to get a grip. Eleanor, of course, was no help at all. She had taken to inviting Addison to everything. Sunday dinners at their parents' country house, casual gatherings with her design colleagues, afternoon tea at increasingly elaborate venues. And Colin was always there, because Eleanor insisted, because she saw something her brother refused to acknowledge. "You two are hilarious," Eleanor announced one evening after dinner at their parents' home, where Colin and Addison had spent 3 hours carefully not looking at each other. The tension could power a small village. "I don't know what you're talking about," Colin said flatly. "Neither do I," Addison agreed too quickly. Eleanor just smiled. The music incident happened on a Thursday night. Addison was curled on her sofa, trying to focus on the financial reports she had brought home from the bank. The numbers blurred before her eyes, her concentration shattered by the day's accumulated exhaustion. She was just considering an early night when she heard it. Music, drifting down from the penthouse. Classical at first, something dramatic and sweeping, full of strings and crescendo. Then it shifted to jazz, then something modern and bass-heavy that made her ceiling vibrate slightly. She tried to ignore it, turned up her own music, buried herself in her reports, made tea. But the bass persisted, a rhythmic intrusion she couldn't escape. "Just go up there," she told herself. "Your neighbors. This is a normal neighbor thing to do." Still, it took her 20 minutes to gather the courage. She climbed the stairs in her pajamas, soft cotton shorts and an oversized shirt, her hair pulled into a messy knot atop her head. It was only when she stood before his door, finger hovering over the bell, that she realized how she must look. Too late now. She knocked. The music stopped immediately, followed by footsteps. The door swung open, and there was Colin, still dressed from work, though his tie was loosened and his hair disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His eyes travelled over her once quickly before snapping back to her face. Something flickered in their depths. Surprise? Appreciation? She couldn't tell. The music, Addison said, her voice smaller than intended. It was a little loud. I'm so sorry. The words came immediately, genuine regret colouring his tone. I didn't realize. I'll keep it down. Thank you. She should leave. Turn around, descend the stairs, return to her apartment and her reports and her sensible, controlled life. But her feet wouldn't move, and he wasn't closing the door, and they stood there in the soft hallway light like two people frozen in a photograph. Colin's gaze dropped to her outfit, the shorts that revealed far too much leg, the shirt slipping off one shoulder, the bare feet and makeup-free face. She looked soft, unguarded, beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. I won't let it happen again, he said quietly, his voice rougher than before. I appreciate it. Still, neither moved. Finally, Addison stepped back, breaking the spell. Good night, Colin. Good night. She descended the stairs on unsteady legs, feeling his gaze on her until she disappeared from view. Only when she heard his door close did she release the breath she'd been holding. Upstairs, Colin leaned against the closed door, heart hammering against his ribs. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, as if he could somehow reach through it to her. What is happening to me? He didn't have an answer. He wasn't sure he wanted one. But that night, for the first time in years, Colin Rutherford fell asleep thinking not of contracts or market projections, but of honey-brown hair and autumn eyes, and a woman in cotton pajamas who had turned his carefully ordered world completely upside down. The garage beneath Kensington Heights was cool and dim, filled with the echo of footsteps and the distant hum of the building's mechanical systems. Addison stood beside her car, wrestling with a box that had seemed perfectly manageable at the shop, but had somehow tripled in weight during the drive home. Come on, she muttered, trying to angle the box through the narrow gap between her car and the concrete pillar. Just cooperate. The box did not cooperate. It caught on the doorframe, slipped from her grip, and nearly toppled to the ground. Addison caught it at the last second, arms straining, forehead creased with effort. You're going to hurt yourself. The voice came from behind her, low, familiar, and carrying that particular note of command she was beginning to recognize. Addison turned to find Colin approaching, still in his perfectly tailored suit, briefcase in hand. He must have just returned from work. Before she could protest, he set down his briefcase and reached for the box. Let me. I can manage. But he had already lifted it from her arms, handling the weight as if it were nothing. His forearms flexed beneath the rolled sleeves of his shirt, and Addison found herself momentarily distracted by the sight. Where does this go? He asked. My apartment. But really, I could have. You were about to drop it on your foot. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He wasn't wrong. They walked to the elevator in silence, Colin carrying the box with effortless ease, while Addison trailed beside him, feeling simultaneously grateful and flustered. In the elevator, she studied their reflection again, him tall and commanding, her small beside him, both of them looking anywhere but at each other. He carried the box all the way to her door, setting it down only when she had unlocked the apartment. Thank you, she said softly. You didn't have to do that. You'll hurt yourself trying to manage these things alone. His tone was matter of fact, but his eyes held something warmer. Next time, ask for help. It wasn't a request. It was nearly an order, delivered with an intensity that made her breath catch. I will, she heard herself promise. He nodded once, turned, and strode toward the stairs. Addison watched him go, the box forgotten at her feet, her heart doing strange and wonderful things inside her chest. The dinner party happened the following weekend. Eleanor had organized it, of course, a casual gathering at her friend Charlotte's townhouse, ostensibly to celebrate some professional milestone Addison couldn't quite remember. What she did remember was Eleanor's insistence that she attend, and Colin's resigned agreement to do the same. Charlotte's home was warm and inviting, filled with soft lighting and the aroma of roasting vegetables. The guest list included a dozen of Eleanor's friends and colleagues, creative types mostly, with strong opinions about architecture and art. Addison found herself enjoying their company, drawn into conversations about design philosophy and the merits of various London neighbourhoods. Colin stood at the edges of these discussions, drink in hand, offering occasional comments that revealed surprising depth beneath his stoic exterior. He knew about art, about architecture, about the history of the buildings they debated. When he spoke, people listened. Addison tried not to stare. She failed repeatedly. They gravitated toward each other as the evening progressed, not consciously but inevitably, like planets pulled into each other's orbit. Whenever Addison looked up from a conversation, Colin was nearby. Whenever he scanned the room, his eyes found her first. Charlotte noticed. "So how long have you two been together?" she asked during a lull in the conversation, nodding toward Colin with a knowing smile. Addison's wine went down the wrong way. She coughed, face flushing scarlet. We're neighbors," Colin interjected smoothly, appearing at her side as if summoned. "Nothing more. Neighbors." Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "You live in the same building, you're always together, and the chemistry between you is practically visible. Forgive me for assuming." "Chemistry." The word hung in the air like smoke. "We're just neighbors," Colin repeated, his voice firmer this time. "If you say so." Charlotte's smile suggested she believed nothing of the sort. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of discomfort. Addison couldn't shake Charlotte's words, couldn't stop being hyper-aware of every moment Colin stood near her, every accidental brush of shoulders or meeting of eyes. The chemistry was obvious, apparently. Everyone could see it. Everyone except the two people determined to ignore it. In the car ride home, Eleanor insisted they share a taxi since they were going to the same place. The silence was suffocating. Eleanor sat between them, scrolling through her phone with suspicious contentment, while Colin stared out one window and Addison stared out the other. "That was fun," Eleanor announced, as they pulled up to Kensington Heights. "Charlotte loved you, Addison. She wants to hire you to handle her investments. That's flattering." They walked into the lobby together, three abreast, footsteps echoing on the marble floor. At the elevator, Eleanor pressed the button and turned to face them both. "Well, good night, you two," she grinned. "Don't stay up too late, being neighbors and all." Then she was gone, disappearing through a side door that led to the parking garage where her car was waiting. She didn't even live in the building, a fact that seemed to have escaped her entirely, or perhaps she simply didn't care. Colin and Addison stood alone before the elevator doors. "She's not subtle," Addison murmured. "She never has been." The elevator arrived. They stepped inside. The doors closed. 12 floors stretched ahead of them. 12 floors of proximity and tension, and the word chemistry echoing in both their minds. "Charlotte was wrong," Colin said suddenly, not looking at her. "About us." "Of course she was. We're neighbors, that's all." "Exactly." The elevator stopped at her floor. The doors opened. Addison stepped out, then turned back to face him. "Good night, Colin." "Good night." The doors began to close, and for one wild moment Addison thought she saw something in his expression. Longing, perhaps, or frustration, or both. Then the doors sealed shut, and he was gone. Addison walked to her apartment, unlocked the door, and leaned against it in the darkness. Her heart was racing. Her skin felt too warm. Charlotte's words played on repeat in her mind. "The chemistry between you is practically visible." She pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the heat there, and wondered how much longer they could keep pretending there was nothing to see. The charity gala at the Hartington Hotel was the kind of event that appeared in society pages. Crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across marble floors, women in designer gowns, men in impeccably tailored tuxedos, and enough champagne to fill a small lake. Eleanor had secured tickets weeks ago, insisting that Addison needed to expand her social circle and experience London's finer offerings. Addison suspected ulterior motives, but she had agreed anyway. She chose her dress carefully, an elegant burgundy gown with a modest neckline, and a back that dipped just low enough to be interesting. Her hair was swept up in a loose chignon, a few tendrils framing her face, and she wore the pearl earrings her mother had given her for her 21st birthday. When she examined herself in the mirror, she felt for the first time in months genuinely beautiful. Eleanor picked her up at 7, resplendent in emerald silk, her energy infectious as always. "You look stunning," Eleanor declared, circling Addison with an appraising eye. "Colin is going to lose his mind." "Colin isn't the reason I dressed up." "Of course not." Eleanor's smile suggested she knew better. "He's meeting us there, by the way. Some business meeting ran late, but he promised to appear." Addison's heart performed its familiar acrobatics at the mention of his name. She had spent the past week replaying Charlotte's words, analyzing every interaction, every glance, every charged silence in the elevator. The chemistry was obvious, Charlotte had said. Everyone could see it. Everyone except the two people pretending it didn't exist. The Hartingtons' ballroom was breathtaking, a soaring space of gold and cream with arrangements of white roses on every table and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Eleanor navigated the crowd with practiced ease, introducing Addison to designers, philanthropists, and the occasional minor celebrity. Addison smiled, shook hands, made small talk, all while scanning the room for a familiar figure. She spotted Colin across the ballroom, deep in conversation with two older gentlemen who radiated wealth and influence. Even from this distance, he commanded attention. Taller than most, broader than most, his dark tuxedo fitting him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. When he laughed at something one of the men said, the sound reached her across the crowd, and something in her chest tightened. As if sensing her gaze, Colin looked up. Their eyes met across the glittering expanse, and for one suspended moment, the entire room seemed to fade. He was so handsome, it almost hurt to look at him. And the way he was looking at her, intense, unwavering, hungry, made her forget how to breathe. Then someone stepped into her line of sight, and the spell was broken. "I don't believe we've met." The man who had appeared before her was tall and polished, with silver-streaked hair and the confident smile of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, a name Addison vaguely recognized from financial news. Something about mergers and acquisitions, about companies bought and sold like pieces on a chessboard. "Addison Hawthorne," she replied, accepting the handshake he offered. "Hawthorne? Any relation to William Hawthorne of Hawthorne Capital?" "He's my father." Marcus's smile widened. "A pleasure to meet you. I've done business with your father. Brilliant man. May I get you a drink?" Addison glanced toward where Colin had been standing, but he had moved, disappearing into the crowd. She felt a flicker of disappointment, quickly suppressed. "That would be lovely," she said. Marcus proved to be charming company. He asked about her work at the bank, listened attentively to her responses, and shared amusing anecdotes about the financial world that made her laugh despite herself. He was handsome in an older, distinguished way, and his interest in her was flattering. After weeks of tension and confusion, it felt refreshing to talk to someone whose intentions were clear. But even as she laughed at his jokes, even as she accepted a second glass of champagne, part of her remained attuned to something else entirely. She could feel Colin's presence somewhere in the room, like a magnetic pull she couldn't ignore. Marcus leaned closer, his hand coming to rest on her arm in a gesture that was casual, familiar, and just slightly possessive. "You're enchanting," he murmured. "Would you like to step outside? The gardens are beautiful this time of year." Before Addison could respond, a shadow fell over them both. "Addison!" Colin's voice was controlled, but there was something dangerous beneath the surface. "I need to speak with you." Marcus looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition to something that might have been challenge. "Rutherford, I didn't realize you knew Miss Hawthorne." "We're neighbors." Colin's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on Marcus's hand, where it still rested on Addison's arm. "Excuse us." Without waiting for a response, Colin took Addison's elbow and steered her away from the table. His grip was firm but not painful, his pace brisk enough that she had to hurry to keep up. They wove through the crowd, past curious glances and whispered speculation, until they reached a quiet alcove near the back of the ballroom. Only then did he release her. "What are you doing?" Addison demanded, her voice a harsh whisper. Confusion and something that felt dangerously like hope warred in her chest. "That was incredibly rude. He was touching you. We were having a conversation." He was interested in more than conversation. Colin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as frustration. His composure was cracking, revealing something raw beneath. "Webb has a reputation. He collects women like trophies. And that's your concern because—" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Colin stared at her, his chest rising and falling with barely contained emotion. For a long moment he said nothing. "I don't know," he finally admitted, the words seeming to cost him something. "I saw his hand on you, and I don't know." Addison studied him, the man who was always in control, always composed, now standing before her, looking utterly lost. His dark eyes held something she had never seen there before. Vulnerability. "Colin, I'm sorry." He stepped back, physically retreating from whatever had just passed between them. "That was inappropriate. I had no right." "You didn't. I know." He wouldn't meet her eyes now. "I'll take you back to Eleanor." "That's not necessary. Please." The word was soft, almost pleading. "Let me at least do that." They walked back to where Eleanor was holding court near the bar, their silence heavy with everything unspoken. When Eleanor saw them approach, her eyebrows rose toward her hairline, but for once she said nothing. Colin delivered Addison to his sister's side, nodded once, and disappeared into the crowd. Addison watched him go, her heart aching with confusion and longing and the ghost of his fingers on her arm. "What happened?" Eleanor asked quietly. Addison shook her head. "I have no idea." But that wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted tonight. Some barrier had cracked. And as she stood in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by strangers in expensive clothes, Addison realized with terrifying clarity that she was falling for Colin Rutherford. She was falling, and she had no idea how to stop. The days following the gala were a study in avoidance. Colin threw himself into work with renewed ferocity, arriving at the office before dawn and leaving well after dark. He took meetings he didn't need, reviewed contracts that could have waited, and filled every waking moment with activity designed to exhaust his mind into submission. It didn't work. No matter how many spreadsheets he analyzed or how many calls he took, he couldn't escape the memory of Addison in that burgundy gown, couldn't forget the sick feeling that had twisted through him when Marcus Webb touched her arm. He had nearly made a fool of himself. No, he had made a fool of himself, dragging her away like some possessive caveman, admitting to feelings he hadn't even known he had. The look on her face, surprised, confused, and something else he couldn't name, haunted him through sleepless nights and distracted days. What was wrong with him? He was Colin Rutherford. He didn't lose control. He didn't act on impulse. He certainly didn't develop obsessive feelings for his neighbor simply because she had warm eyes and a smile that made the world feel less grey. Except, apparently, he did. Addison, for her part, was navigating her own confusion. She replayed the moment constantly, Colin's hand on her elbow, the barely restrained emotion in his voice, the way he had looked at her like she was something precious and infuriating all at once. "I saw his hand on you, and I don't know." What did that mean? What did any of this mean? She found herself listening for his footsteps above her ceiling, timing her departures to avoid the elevator, analyzing every accidental encounter for hidden significance. It was exhausting. It was maddening. It was completely unlike the calm, rational woman she had always believed herself to be. Eleanor, sensing the tension, wisely kept her distance. She texted Addison cheerful updates about her design projects and sent Colin articles about stress management that he deleted without reading. She was playing the long game, trusting that whatever had sparked between her brother and her friend would eventually catch fire on its own. 5 days after the gala, fate intervened. Addison was running late for a meeting at the bank, her mind full of client portfolios and quarterly projections, as she hurried down the external staircase that connected the building's rear entrance to the parking area. The steps were damp from an earlier rain, and she was wearing heels that, in retrospect, had been a poor choice for the weather. She was on the 3rd step from the bottom when her foot slipped. Time seemed to slow as she pitched forward, arms windmilling uselessly, her ankle twisting at an angle that sent white-hot pain shooting up her leg. She managed to catch herself on the railing, preventing a complete fall, but when she tried to put weight on her foot, she gasped and immediately sat down on the cold stone step. "No, no, no," she muttered, testing the ankle gently. It wasn't broken, she could move it, but the pain was sharp and immediate, and already she could see swelling beginning beneath the strap of her shoe. The universe, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. What happened? The voice came from above her, and Addison looked up to find Colin descending the steps. Briefcase in hand, his expression shifting from surprise to concern, to something fierce and protective as he took in the scene. He must have been leaving for work at the same moment she had been hurrying to her car. "I fell," she said unnecessarily, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Twisted my ankle. It's fine. I just need a minute." But Colin was already beside her, crouching down, his hand reaching for her foot with a gentleness that contradicted his severe expression. "Let me see. Really, it's nothing." He ignored her protest, carefully removing her shoe and examining the ankle with surprising expertise. His fingers were warm against her skin, his touch light but thorough. Addison held her breath, overwhelmed by his proximity, by the concern etched into every line of his face. "It's already swelling," he announced, his voice tight. "You need ice and elevation. Can you stand?" She tried. The moment she put weight on the foot, pain lanced through her, and she stumbled. Colin caught her instantly, his arm wrapping around her waist, steadying her against his solid frame. That answers that question. Before she could protest, he shifted his position and lifted her into his arms, as if she weighed nothing at all. I'm taking you upstairs. Colin, that's not necessary. You can't walk, and I'm not leaving you sitting on wet steps in the cold. His tone left no room for argument. My apartment is closer. I'm calling my doctor. Addison wanted to protest further, but the pain in her ankle was throbbing, and being held in Colin's arms felt safer than anything had in a very long time. She let herself relax against his chest, let herself breathe in the familiar scent of his cologne, let herself pretend just for a moment that this was something other than neighborly concern. He carried her up 3 flights of stairs without breaking a sweat, navigating the penthouse door with impressive dexterity, and deposited her on the dove-grey sofa with the same care one might show a priceless artifact. Don't move, he instructed, already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Dr. Harrison. It's just a sprain. We don't know that yet. He was dialing as he walked to the kitchen, returning moments later with ice wrapped in a pristine towel. He lifted her leg onto a pillow, placed the ice pack against her ankle, and adjusted everything with meticulous attention. He'll be here in 15 minutes. Addison watched him, this powerful man reduced to fussing over pillows and ice packs, and felt something warm bloom in her chest despite the pain. You don't have to do this. Colin paused, his eyes meeting hers. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the gold flecks in his brown irises, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Yes, he said quietly, I do. Dr. Harrison arrived promptly, a distinguished man with kind eyes, who examined her ankle without commenting on his surroundings, or the obvious tension between his patient and the man hovering nearby. His diagnosis was reassuring, a mild sprain, nothing torn or broken, but his prescription less so. Rest, he announced, packing up his medical bag. Keep it elevated, ice it regularly, and stay off it for at least 2 or 3 days. Anti-inflammatories for the pain. 2 or 3 days? Addison's eyes went wide. I have work. You have an ankle that needs to heal. Dr. Harrison smiled gently. Take care of yourself, Miss Hawthorne. When the doctor had gone, Addison turned to Colin with every intention of insisting he help her back to her own apartment. But he was already walking toward the guest room, and when he returned he was carrying extra pillows. You're staying here, he said, cutting off her protest before it could form, until you can walk properly. Colin, I can't just... Yes, you can. He set the pillows beside her, adjusted the ice pack again and straightened with an expression that dared her to argue. I'll call your office. I'll handle everything. Addison stared at him, this man who ran a financial empire with an iron fist, now insisting on playing nursemaid to a woman with a twisted ankle. Why are you doing this? Something flickered in his eyes, something vulnerable, something true. Because I want to. It wasn't an answer, not really, but somehow it was enough. The first morning, Addison woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the soft sound of footsteps outside her door. She was disoriented for a moment, the unfamiliar ceiling and luxurious sheets confusing her sleep-fogged mind. Then memory returned, the fall, the sprain, Colin carrying her up the stairs as if she weighed nothing at all. She was in his guest room, in his penthouse wrapped in sheets that smelled faintly of lavender, and something else she couldn't identify. A soft knock preceded the door opening, and Colin appeared carrying a tray. He was dressed casually, dark trousers and a soft grey sweater that made him look younger, more approachable, and his hair was slightly damp from the shower. Good morning, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. How's the ankle? Addison pushed herself up against the pillows, acutely aware of her dishevelled state. Hair tangled, yesterday's makeup probably smudged, wearing a borrowed t-shirt that was far too large for her. Better, I think. The swelling's gone down. Good. I brought breakfast. She looked at the tray and felt her heart stutter. Toast cut into neat triangles, a small bowl of fresh fruit, orange juice, and coffee in a delicate porcelain cup. It was simple but thoughtful, arranged with care that seemed at odds with the severe businessman she had come to know. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. I wanted to. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat, his posture relaxed in a way she had never seen before. I've cleared my schedule for the next few days. I'll be working from home. Colin, that's not necessary. It's done. His tone was final but not unkind. Eat your breakfast. The doctor said you need to keep your strength up. They fell into an unexpected rhythm after that. Colin would bring her meals. Breakfast in bed, lunch on the sofa, dinner at the small table by the window, with the city lights twinkling below. He worked from home as promised, setting up his laptop at the kitchen counter, where he could keep an eye on her while taking calls and reviewing documents. Addison watched him work, fascinated by the contrast between his professional demeanor and his domestic attentiveness. On the phone, he was sharp and commanding, the powerful CEO whose decisions moved markets. But the moment he hung up, he would look over at her, his expression softening, and ask if she needed anything. "More tea? Another pillow? Are you comfortable? The light isn't too bright?" By the second day, Addison could walk with minimal pain, but Colin insisted she stay. "The doctor said rest," he reminded her when she suggested returning to her own apartment. "You're not fully healed." "I'm fine, Colin. I can manage on my own." "I know you can." He was standing at the stove, stirring something that smelled wonderful. Soup, she thought, homemade from the look of it. "But you don't have to." She didn't have an argument for that. They spent the evenings on the sofa, watching films neither of them really paid attention to. Colin sat at one end, Addison at the other, with her ankle elevated on cushions, and the space between them felt both vast and impossibly small. Sometimes their hands would brush when passing the remote control, and Addison would feel the contact like electricity, a jolt that traveled from her fingertips to her heart. He told her about his childhood during those quiet hours, growing up with Eleanor, learning the business from his father, the pressure of inheriting an empire built over generations. His voice was low and measured, but she heard the weight beneath his words, the loneliness of a man who had spent his life being strong for everyone else. "My parents have been married for 40 years, he said on the second evening, staring at the city lights rather than at her. "I've watched them my whole life, the way they look at each other, the way they still hold hands when they walk. That's what I've been looking for." He paused, something painful crossing his features. "I'd started to think I'd never find it." Addison's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because I've never felt anything like what they have, not once, not with anyone." He finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Until recently." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Addison's heart pounded against her ribs. She wanted to ask what he meant, wanted to bridge the distance between them, but he looked away, reaching for the remote control, and the moment passed. On the third day, Addison helped him cook dinner. She could stand comfortably now, and the kitchen was large enough that she could lean against the counter while chopping vegetables without straining her ankle. They worked side by side in companionable silence, and she found herself smiling at the discovery that Colin Rutherford, master of the financial universe, was a mediocre cook at best. "The recipe says simmer, not boil," she pointed out, reaching past him to adjust the flame. "There's a difference." "A significant one, yes." She laughed, and he looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch, tender, amused, and something else she was afraid to name. "You're laughing at me." "I'm helping you. There's a difference." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Addison felt the last of her defenses crumble. This man, this serious, guarded, unexpectedly gentle man, had somehow become essential to her in ways she couldn't explain. She reached up to brush a bit of flour from his cheek, a gesture that was innocent and intimate all at once. Colin went still beneath her touch, his eyes darkening, his breath catching audibly in the quiet kitchen. "Addison," he murmured, her name a warning and a plea. "Yes?" For a long moment, neither moved. The air between them crackled with tension, with weeks of suppressed longing finally threatening to break free. Addison could see the battle playing out across his features, desire warring with restraint, need fighting against years of careful control. Then the timer went off, and they both stepped back, the spell broken but not forgotten. They ate dinner in charged silence, neither willing to acknowledge what had almost happened, both knowing that something fundamental had shifted. The careful distance they had maintained was gone, replaced by an awareness so acute it was almost painful. After dinner, they returned to the sofa. A film played on the screen, something neither of them was watching. The space between them seemed smaller than ever, the air thick with everything unsaid. Colin's hand found hers in the dim light, his fingers intertwining with hers, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Addison looked at their joined hands, then up at his face and saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes, wonder, fear, and the trembling edge of something that felt terrifyingly like love. Tonight, she knew, something was going to change. She could feel it in her bones. The film had ended 20 minutes ago, but neither of them had moved to change it. The screen cast a soft blue glow across the living room, illuminating the space between them, a space that had shrunk considerably over the past 3 days. Colin's thumb traced slow circles on the back of Addison's hand, an unconscious gesture that sent shivers down her spine. She watched him in the dim light, the strong line of his profile, the way his jaw tightened and relaxed as if he was wrestling with something inside himself. "I don't want you to go back to your apartment tomorrow," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Addison's heart stumbled. "Colin, I know it doesn't make sense." He turned to face her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. "I know we've only known each other for a few weeks. I know this is fast and probably foolish, and 100 other things I would normally never allow myself to feel. What are you feeling?" The question hung between them, delicate and dangerous. Colin was silent for a long moment, his grip on her hand tightening almost imperceptibly. "Since the hospital," he began, each word measured and careful, "since I saw you standing there holding that finger, looking mortified and beautiful and so completely yourself, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." He released a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "Every time I see you in the elevator, my heart does something it's never done before. Every time you laugh, I want to be the one making you laugh. Every time another man so much as looks at you—" He trailed off, shaking his head, and Addison saw vulnerability in him that she had never imagined existed. "I've spent my entire life searching for what my parents have," he continued quietly. 40 years of marriage, and they still look at each other like they're the only two people in the world. I've dated women, I've had relationships, but I've never felt anything close to that. Not once." His eyes found hers, dark and intense and achingly honest. "Until you." Addison felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of his words. This man, who commanded boardrooms and intimidated rivals, was laying his heart bare before her with a courage that humbled her completely. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice catching on the words. "I've only had one serious relationship, and it destroyed my ability to trust." What happened? She hadn't spoken about Daniel to anyone except Eleanor, and even then only in the vaguest terms. But Colin was looking at her with such open concern, such genuine desire to understand, that the words spilled out before she could stop them. "His name was Daniel. We dated for 6 months. I thought he loved me." She laughed bitterly. "He was charming, attentive, everything I thought I wanted. But it was all a performance. He was only with me because of my father, because of what my family name could do for his career." Colin's expression darkened. "He used you. He used me." The admission still stung, even after all this time. When I found out, when I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He said I should be grateful anyone was interested at all, that my family connections were my only appealing quality. "That's not true." Colin's voice was fierce, his hand gripping hers tightly. "Addison, that's not remotely true. I know that now. Mostly." She wiped at her eyes with her free hand, embarrassed by the tears that had escaped. "But after him, I decided it was safer to focus on work, safer to keep everyone at a distance. I thought if I never let anyone close, I could never be hurt like that again. And now?" She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw everything she had been afraid to hope for. Not a man interested in her family name or her father's connections, but a man who had memorized how she took her coffee, who brought her breakfast in bed, who held her hand like she was something precious. "Now," she whispered, "you make me want to be brave." Colin released her hand only to cup her face, his palms warm against her cheeks. He tilted her face up toward his eyes searching hers for permission. "I've never felt this way about anyone," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I'm doing this right, I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I know that I want to try, with you. Only with you. Colin, I'm falling for you, Addison." The words were simple, direct, devastating in their honesty. "I think I've been falling since the moment I saw you." She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only look into his eyes and see her own feelings reflected back at her, the wonder, the fear, the trembling precipice of something enormous and beautiful. He leaned closer, his forehead touching hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. "If you don't want this, tell me now and I'll walk away. I'll go back to being your neighbor, nothing more." "I don't want you to stop." Her voice was barely audible. "I don't want you to walk away." "Thank God." And then he kissed her. The first touch of his lips was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when she responded, when her hands fisted in the soft fabric of his sweater and pulled him closer, something broke free in both of them. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and desperate and impossibly sweet all at once. Weeks of tension, of stolen glances and accidental touches and charged silences poured into that single point of connection. Colin's hands slid into her hair, cradling her head as if she were the most precious thing he had ever held. Addison pressed closer, losing herself in the taste of him, the feel of him, the overwhelming rightness of finally being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colin rested his forehead against hers once more. His eyes were dark with desire, but beneath that was something softer, something that looked remarkably like awe. "Stay," he whispered. "Not because of your ankle. Not because you have to. Stay because you want to." Addison smiled, her heart so full it threatened to overflow. She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw, marveling that she was allowed to do this now. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll stay." His smile transformed him, made him look younger, lighter, happier than she had ever seen him. He pulled her close, tucking her against his chest, and Addison listened to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and knew that everything was about to change. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid. The kiss had changed everything, but they remained on the sofa for a long while afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, neither willing to break the spell that had settled over them. Colin held her close, one hand stroking through her hair, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. "I've imagined this," he admitted quietly, his voice a low rumble in his chest. "More times than I should admit." Addison tilted her head to look at him. "Imagined what?" "Holding you like this. Having you close." He pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her temple, then the corner of her eye. "I've been going out of my mind, trying to pretend I wasn't falling for you." She smiled against his chest. "You hid it well." "Did I?" He pulled back slightly to look at her, one eyebrow raised. "Eleanor said it was the most obvious thing she'd ever seen. Apparently the entire family has been placing bets on when I would finally admit my feelings." "Eleanor placed bets on us?" "Eleanor orchestrated most of this, I suspect. The coffee invitation, the moving help, the endless social events where we always seem to end up in the same room." He shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "My sister is many things, but subtle isn't one of them." Addison laughed, the sound bright and free in the quiet room. "I should thank her." "Don't. It will only encourage her." They fell into comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows, the world outside forgotten. Colin's hand traced lazy patterns on her back, and Addison felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete and utter peace. "Are you tired?" he asked eventually, his voice soft. "No." She looked up at him, and something in his expression made her breath catch. The tenderness was still there, but beneath it was something deeper, something that set her pulse racing. "Not tired at all." Colin studied her face for a long moment, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Addison, I need you to know, whatever happens tonight, whatever you want or don't want, I'll follow your lead. There's no pressure, no expectations." The sincerity in his words made her heart ache. This man who commanded empires was giving her complete control, trusting her with his vulnerability, just as she was trusting him with hers. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I want this. Why I want you." His eyes darkened, and when he kissed her this time, there was nothing tentative about it. It was deep and consuming, a promise of everything to come. Addison melted into him, her fingers finding the hem of his sweater, her heart pounding with anticipation, and something that felt remarkably like coming home. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the bedroom with the same careful strength he had shown when bringing her up from the stairs days ago. But this was different. This was a threshold being crossed, a beginning rather than a rescue. The bedroom was bathed in soft moonlight. The city sprawled beneath them like a carpet of diamonds. Colin set her down gently on the edge of the bed, then knelt before her, his hands cupping her face. "You're beautiful," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I need you to know that. Whatever he told you, whatever made you doubt yourself, it was all lies. You are extraordinary, Addison Hawthorne." Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back, reaching for him instead. "Show me." And he did. Their first time together was everything she hadn't known she needed. Colin was reverent, attentive, discovering every response, every sigh, treating her like something precious. He whispered her name like a prayer, touched her like she might break, loved her with an intensity that left them both trembling. Addison surrendered completely, feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. This was different from anything that had come before, not just physical but emotional, spiritual, a joining of two souls that had been searching for each other without knowing it. Afterward, Colin wrapped her in his arms, pressing kisses to her hair as their breathing slowly returned to normal. "Come with me," he murmured, rising from the bed and extending his hand. He led her to the terrace, where a hot tub steamed gently in the night air. The stars were visible above them, unusually bright for London, and the city stretched out below in silent witness. They slipped into the warm water together, and Colin pulled her onto his lap, her back against his chest. For a while, they simply sat there, watching the stars, feeling the warmth of the water and each other. "I didn't know it could be like this," Addison whispered, her head resting against his shoulder. "Neither did I." His arms tightened around her. "I've been waiting my whole life for you. I just didn't know it until now." She turned in his arms, and when they came together again beneath the starlit sky, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. They moved together like they had done this 1,000 times, like their bodies had been made specifically for each other. When dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Colin carried her back to bed, tucking her beneath the covers with infinite tenderness. Addison fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted and content, a smile playing on her lips. Colin didn't sleep. He lay beside her, watching her face in the growing light, her hair spread across his pillow like spilled honey. She looked peaceful. She looked like everything he had ever wanted. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, and made a silent promise to himself, and to her. He would spend the rest of his life making sure she never stopped smiling like that. The months that followed were a revelation. Addison had always believed that love was grand gestures and dramatic declarations, the stuff of films and fairy tales. But what she found with Colin was something different, something quieter and infinitely more precious. It was love built in the small moments, the daily rituals, the ordinary magic of two lives intertwining. They fell into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Mornings began with coffee at his penthouse, where Colin would prepare breakfast while Addison sat at the counter, stealing bites of fruit and critiquing his technique. He was, as she had discovered, a thoroughly mediocre cook, but what he lacked in skill, he made up for in determination. "You're stirring too fast," she would say, leaning over to adjust the heat. "The eggs will turn rubbery." "They're fine. They're approaching the consistency of shoe leather." He would huff, feigning offense, but his eyes would sparkle with amusement, and more often than not, they would end up laughing together over plates of slightly imperfect food that somehow tasted better than anything she had ever eaten. Some mornings, Colin would descend to her apartment instead, appearing at her door with no excuse beyond, "I wanted to see you." He would lean against her kitchen counter, watching her move through her morning routine with an expression of quiet contentment that made her heart flip every single time. "You're staring," she would say, not looking up from the coffee she was preparing. "I'm appreciating the view." She would blush, she always blushed, and he would smile that rare, genuine smile that was reserved only for her. Evenings were spent together more often than not. Addison would arrive at the penthouse with dessert from the bakery down the street, claiming she had bought too much, when they both knew she had gone specifically to find his favorite pastries. Colin would greet her at the door, his hand automatically finding her waist, pulling her close for a kiss that made the rest of the world fall away. They worked side by side in the comfortable silence of the living room, he reviewing contracts and market analyses, she examining client portfolios and investment reports. Sometimes hours would pass without either speaking, the only sounds the rustle of papers and the distant hum of the city below. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full, rich with the simple pleasure of being together. Colin developed habits he couldn't explain and didn't try to. He touched her waist every time he passed, a gesture so automatic it happened before conscious thought. He kissed her forehead before leaving for work each morning, a ritual that had become as essential as his morning coffee. He called her neighbor, with a particular warmth in his voice that made her melt, a private joke between them that never stopped being funny. "Good morning, neighbor," he would murmur against her hair as she emerged from sleep. "Good morning yourself," she would reply, burrowing closer into his warmth. Addison had her own habits. She stole his cardigans constantly, wrapping herself in the soft cashmere that smelled like him, claiming she would return them eventually. She made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, strong a touch of cream, no sugar, without asking anymore, the knowledge automatic. And she had developed an irresistible urge to mess up his perfectly styled hair, just to see the way his lips twitched, with barely suppressed amusement. "You're ruining my professional image," he would protest, catching her hand. "Your hair was too perfect. It was intimidating. I'm supposed to be intimidating. Not with me." And he would kiss her, and the hair would get even more disheveled, and neither of them would care in the slightest. Eleanor, of course, was insufferably pleased with herself. "I knew it," she declared at their first official family dinner as a couple, pointing her fork at Colin with triumphant glee. "I knew from the moment I saw you two in that hospital. The chemistry was undeniable." "You're taking too much credit," Colin said dryly. "I'm taking exactly the right amount of credit. I introduced you. I orchestrated the coffee meeting. I revealed that you were neighbors. That was coincidence. There are no coincidences in love, brother dear, only opportunities seized by brilliant sisters." Addison laughed, and Colin rolled his eyes. But beneath the table his hand found hers and squeezed. Eleanor's smugness was a small price to pay for the happiness they had found. The family dinners became regular occurrences. Addison met Colin's parents properly, William and Margaret Rutherford, a couple so obviously in love after 40 years that it made her believe in forever. William told her stories about Colin as a boy, serious even then, always wanting to do things perfectly. Margaret pulled her aside to whisper that she hadn't seen her son smile this much in years. "Thank you," Margaret said, squeezing Addison's hands, "for whatever you've done to bring him back to us." Addison didn't know how to explain that Colin had done the same for her, had pulled her out of the protective shell she had built around her heart, had shown her that trust was possible, that love didn't have to hurt. 6 months passed in this ordinary magic, each day building on the last, their connection deepening with every shared meal, every quiet evening, every stolen kiss in the elevator that they still rode together. Addison had stopped thinking about the future, content to live in the beautiful present they had created, but Colin had been thinking about the future, planning it, in fact, with the same meticulous attention he brought to everything important. And everything was about to change. The Rutherford family estate sprawled across several acres of manicured English countryside, its Georgian manor house presiding over gardens that had been tended for generations. It was here on a perfect spring afternoon, exactly 6 months after a chance meeting in a hospital emergency room, that both families had gathered for what Eleanor had mysteriously dubbed a special lunch. Addison arrived with Colin, her hand clasped in his as they walked up the gravel drive. The gardens were in full bloom, roses climbing the ancient stone walls, wisteria draping the pergola, beds of lavender releasing their sweet perfume into the warm air. It was the kind of day that seemed designed for happiness. "You're nervous," she observed, studying his profile. "Your jaw is doing that thing." "What thing?" "The clenching thing. You do it when you're stressed." She squeezed his hand. "Is everything all right?" Colin looked at her. This woman who had learned to read him so completely, who noticed the tiny tells he had spent a lifetime hiding from everyone else, and felt his heart expand with love so fierce it almost frightened him. "Everything is perfect," he said softly. "I promise." The lunch was set up in the garden, beneath a white canopy that fluttered gently in the breeze. Long tables were draped in linen, laden with flowers and crystal, and the fine china that Margaret Rutherford reserved for truly special occasions. And gathered around those tables were the people who mattered most. Colin's parents, beaming with barely contained excitement, Eleanor, suspiciously glued to her camera, and to Addison's surprise, her own parents, who had somehow made the journey from their country home without her knowledge. "Mother? Father?" Addison's eyes went wide. "What are you doing here?" "We were invited, darling." Her mother kissed her cheek, eyes twinkling with secrets. "Such a lovely day for a garden party, don't you think?" Something strange was happening. Addison could feel it in the air, an undercurrent of anticipation that seemed to vibrate through every person present. Eleanor was photographing everything with suspicious enthusiasm. William Rutherford kept exchanging meaningful glances with his wife. Even the staff moved with unusual purpose, as if following a carefully choreographed plan. "Colin," Addison whispered, turning to him. "What's going on?" But Colin was no longer beside her. He had moved to the center of the garden where a small clearing had been decorated with rose petals and fairy lights that would twinkle once evening fell. Everyone had fallen silent, their attention focused entirely on him. And then, as Addison watched with dawning comprehension, Colin Rutherford, the man who commanded boardrooms and intimidated rivals, lowered himself to one knee. "Oh," she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Colin." "Addison." His voice was steady, but she could see the emotion trembling beneath the surface, the vulnerability he was laying bare before their families and the spring sky. "6 months ago, I walked into a hospital emergency room with a ridiculous injury and an even more ridiculous amount of pride. I was certain I had my life figured out. I was certain I knew exactly what I wanted and how to get it." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers across the garden. "I was wrong. I had no idea what I wanted until I saw you standing there, holding your injured finger, looking mortified and beautiful and so completely yourself. In that moment, something shifted inside me, something I couldn't name and couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried." Eleanor's camera clicked softly in the background, capturing every second. "You have turned my carefully ordered world upside down," Colin continued, a smile playing at his lips. "You steal my cardigans and mess up my hair and make my coffee exactly right without being asked. You laugh at my terrible cooking and challenge me when I'm being stubborn and see through every wall I've ever built. You make me want to be better, not because I'm not enough, but because you deserve the very best version of me." Addison felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I've spent my whole life watching my parents, trying to understand the secret of their love, how two people could look at each other after 40 years with the same wonder as the first day they met." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring, a stunning vintage diamond surrounded by smaller stones, elegant and timeless and perfect. "I finally understand. It's not a secret at all. It's a choice made every single day to love, to cherish, to show up for each other no matter what." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw everything, the fear, the hope, the overwhelming love that matched the tidal wave in her own heart. "Addison Hawthorne, you are my first love, my only love, the one I've been waiting for without knowing I was waiting." His voice caught, rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" The garden was utterly silent, the world holding its breath alongside her. Addison laughed, a sound that was half sob, half pure joy, and crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps. She dropped to her knees in front of him, ruining her dress in the grass, not caring in the slightest. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Colin's face transformed with a smile so radiant it seemed to rival the spring sunshine. His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. And then he was pulling her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart pounding against her own. Around them, their families erupted in cheers and applause. Eleanor was crying and photographing simultaneously, somehow managing both with impressive dedication. Margaret Rutherford was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief while William beamed with paternal pride. Addison's parents embraced each other, their own decades-long love reflected in the joy they felt for their daughter. But in that moment, wrapped in Colin's arms beneath the spring canopy, Addison was aware of none of it. There was only him, his warmth, his strength, his whispered words against her hair. "I love you," he murmured. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you know how much." "I love you too," she whispered back, pulling away just enough to look into his eyes. "My neighbor." He laughed, the sound full and free and utterly happy, and kissed her with their families cheering around them and the future stretching out before them, bright with promise. 1 year later, the penthouse had transformed. Where once there had been minimalist precision, every surface bare, every line clean, every object placed with deliberate purpose, there was now life in all its beautiful chaos. Photographs lined the walls and crowded every surface, the two of them at the cafe where Eleanor had orchestrated their friendship, laughing at some shared joke, their wedding day, Addison radiant in ivory lace, while Colin looked at her like she had hung the moon, vacation snapshots from Italy, from Greece, from a quiet village in the Cotswolds, where they had spent a week doing nothing but existing together. The furniture had softened too. Throw pillows in warm colors. A cashmere blanket draped over the sofa, one of many Addison had accumulated, claiming the penthouse was always cold when they both knew she simply liked being surrounded by softness. Books stacked on the coffee table, half read and abandoned when more interesting distractions presented themselves. A small collection of mismatched mugs in the kitchen, each with its own story, integrating with Colin's precise collection of matching porcelain. It was a home now, not just an apartment. Their home. Addison walked through the front door on a golden autumn afternoon, grocery bags in hand, her 6-month pregnancy evident beneath the soft fabric of her sundress. The baby had been active all day, kicking and turning, making her presence known with the same determination that characterized both her parents. "I told you to call me," Colin's voice came from somewhere behind her, and then the bags were being lifted from her hands with familiar efficiency. "You shouldn't be carrying heavy things." "It's bread, Colin, and some fruit, hardly a grand piano." "It doesn't matter." He set the bags on the counter and turned to her, one hand automatically finding the swell of her belly. "How is she today?" "Restless. I think she's practicing for a career in professional athletics." Addison covered his hand with her own, feeling the warmth of his palm against the place where their daughter grew. "She kicked through my entire presentation this morning." "Very distracting." Colin smiled, that soft, wondering smile that appeared only when he talked about the baby, or looked at Addison, or sometimes simply existed in the quiet contentment of their shared life. "She's going to be stubborn, like her mother, and bossy, like her father. I prefer decisive." "Of course you do." He pulled her close, mindful of the belly between them, and pressed a kiss to her forehead, then her cheek, then her nose, then finally her lips. A gentle, lingering kiss that still made her heart flutter after all this time. "How was your day?" she asked when they parted. "Better now." Before Addison could respond, something soft and furry wound between her legs, meowing insistently. She looked down to find a large orange tabby gazing up at her with imperious green eyes, demanding attention with the confidence of a creature who knew exactly how spoiled he was. "Hello, Mr. Whiskers," she said, bending carefully to scratch behind his ears. "Did you miss me?" Colin watched the interaction with a familiar expression of exasperated affection. "I still can't believe you adopted that beast. He needed a home, and you needed to make peace with your nemesis. He bit me. He required stitches. And now he's family." Addison straightened, grinning at the way Colin was already reaching down to pet the cat despite his protests. "Admit it. You love him." "I tolerate him. You bought him a heated bed last week. That was practical. He was sleeping on my suits." Mr. Whiskers purred loudly, arching into Colin's touch with shameless pleasure. The cat had arrived 3 months into their marriage, adopted from the same client whose home had hosted the fateful business meeting. When Addison learned that the cat needed rehoming, she had driven straight there, returning with the orange tabby and a carrier full of supplies. Colin had complained for approximately 36 hours before being discovered asleep on the sofa, with the cat curled on his chest, both of them snoring gently. The protests continued, but they fooled no one. Now Addison settled onto the sofa while Colin unpacked the groceries, watching him move through their kitchen with familiar grace. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen, still serious, still intense, still capable of intimidating entire boardrooms with a single look. But she knew the softness beneath the severity now. She knew the man who brought her breakfast in bed, and kissed her forehead every morning, and talked to her belly at night, telling their unborn daughter stories about how her parents had met. "We should call Eleanor," Addison said, accepting the glass of water Colin brought her. She texted about dinner plans. "She wants to plan the baby shower." "She's been subtly sending venue suggestions for weeks." "Your sister doesn't know the meaning of subtle." "No." Colin settled beside her, pulling her feet into his lap and beginning to massage them with practiced skill. "She does not." They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon light slanted through the windows, painting golden patterns on the floor. Mr. Whiskers jumped onto the sofa and curled between them, purring his contentment. Addison felt the baby kick against her ribs and smiled, placing Colin's hand where he could feel it too. "Thank you," she said softly. He looked up, confused. "For what?" "For being the best husband." She reached out to touch his face, tracing the familiar lines of his jaw. "For giving me this life. For loving me." Colin turned his head to press a kiss to her palm, his eyes dark with emotion. "You are the love of my life," he murmured against her skin. "My only love. My first and my last." Then he leaned forward and kissed her properly, her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, her chin, and finally her mouth, a slow and thorough exploration that still, after everything, made her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. Outside, the city hummed with its endless energy, but inside the penthouse at Kensington Heights, there was only this: 2 people who had found each other against all odds, building a life filled with love and laughter and ordinary magic. And it was, Addison thought as Colin's arms wrapped around her. Absolutely perfect. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you. And if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.